Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today at growcfo.net.
Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO Show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby. And today I've got a guest with me, Wade Miller. Now, Wade is from the disaster recovery industry. So I thought it would be useful to have a chat with Wade today about risk management, disaster recovery, and all those things that perhaps we should be worried about. See, you hope that the worst never happens, but when it does, how do you cope? So, Wade, welcome to the Grow CFO Show.
Thank you, Kevin. Glad to be here.
Wade, tell me a little bit about you.
So I have been a bit of a diverse background in the workforce. I started off coming out of college working for an institutional money management firm that was small and boutique at the time, became currently the biggest player in their part of the market, PIMCO. Some of you may know who they are. It then got into institutional banking and eventually migrated to getting into disaster recovery as a contractor. Don't want to go into too much detail why that changed, but there was a reason for that. But what I did is I recognized there was something missing in the marketplace, is that contractors did something, insurance companies did something, and the insured, the owners of these buildings, oftentimes were left with two parties making decisions on their behalf that really take care of their risk and their money, who aren't them, and don't necessarily have, though they maybe have good intentions, don't have their best interest in mind, and decided we need to find a way to create more transparency and efficiency in disaster recovery, because people have millions of dollars, and sometimes their whole business on the line, depending on how they're impacted at different stages, and how to help them through that recovery, both financially and I think emotionally too. You're just trying to bring that peace and calm. Our whole goal really is to, at the end of the day, clients are left with the confidence that this got done the best possible way.
Yeah. So when we're talking disaster recovery, what sort of disasters are we potentially talking about? Give me a few examples.
Yeah, sure. There's always the newsworthy ones, the hurricanes, the floods, the earthquakes, the wildfires that make the news. But more often than not, throughout the year, it's just these nuisance things. A sprinkler head pops on an upper floor and floods something out. You have a clog and a sewer backs up and floods out the basement of your building. You have a mold problem potentially that has to be dealt with. You have fires and other water-related issues are predominantly what's related. But if you have a fire, the sprinklers go off, so you end up with water-related even with a fire job. So, and they all have their own kind of specialty ways to look at this. We're looking at what are the contamination levels that go in with these things? What are the health effects besides the building damages that have to be addressed all concurrently? And then you overlay that with now what's the stress and pressure? Now a part of the building or maybe the whole building can't be operated. There's displacement of workforce. There's interruption of business income. And so all these things they all interplay, and contractors and insurance adjusters are equipped to address parts of that, but never the whole big picture. So somebody's got to come back and look at this as a global view, what happens. And so we look at this from date of incident, whether it's a pipe burst or a hurricane impact, all the way through to funds being reimbursed from the insurance company. And if there's a lender involved, that's satisfied, so that the lender has to co-sign on a check, say a bank or a private equity group or a REIT or something that may own part or all of the building, that gets satisfied as well. So the company's made whole completely, physical building and financially.
Yeah. So we're talking property. We're talking physical assets.
Yes. Correct.
Are we talking IT assets as well?
Well, the IT assets, not in the sense that where is your data stored, but the property there that's related to that, to make sure that's restored. So if it's the servers, the computers, if those are all restored properly. But the data backup is a kind of a different aspect of disaster recovery. And a lot of people are pretty good at getting their data backed up and have good plans of action for that, but not always for the physical building.
So I guess the start point of this is understanding what sort of risks you might have.
So look at different industries. What is your industry? Let's say you're a hospital. Your risk is not having an ER or an OR suite available for work. If you're a senior living facility, it's a place of residence for somebody. If you're a hotel, it's rooms to rent or facilities to rent on site. Or if you're a manufacturing plant, it's a slowdown or interruption in your production. And so we look at these things and have to tailor that to what does that individual business need in the end? What's their goal? And also personalize that. Let's say it's a hospital. Two different hospital companies may have different objectives, what they want. We try and line that up so that the contractor and the adjuster who we oversee on their behalf is aligned and knows, like, this is what I have to do here. It's not a cookie cutter. I can't just put it into a program. I can't just run a checklist sheet that's applied to everything. We tailor these things to each one of our clients and get to know what they need. I think you'd mentioned earlier in our conversation, the way people are structured, depending on size, people may be wearing multiple hats. The CFO may also be the treasurer and the risk manager in some organization. In other places, they're separate departments. And so we look at how that communication flow needs to go and what risks are there, both financially and physically, and try and look at that as a whole. Now, I mentioned about health issues, why we may say bring in a specialty besides just a contractor, maybe bring in an industrial hygienist or a certain type of engineer to help with this, because we need the clarity. We can't rely on a contractor and insurance adjuster who aren't really, they may know stuff vicariously, but they're not really the qualified person to make an expert decision. So we want to bring that into play and make sure the client's in control of that information. You're not letting it be subbed out by one of those other two parties, and you're just relying on their interpretation of what you get back. We try and say, let's bring everything front and center, and we'll help you manage that so you have time on your hands. When you think about if a hurricane hits a building, and we've had clients who've had multiple buildings impacted by the same hurricane because of where they're situated, well, that becomes a full-time job to deal with those recoveries and all that goes with it. The displacement of workforce, the displacement of clientele, and just dealing with the insurance, and suddenly a new full-time job got created. You can't really let go of your other job. You're hired to do it. So we come in and say, hey, as needed, that's our expertise. We'll come in and take care of that for you.
Yeah. So I guess you worry about two things here. There's number one, that you've got to, hopefully you're insured against whatever it is that's happened. So you've got a major insurance recovery going on and loss adjustment and so on. But you also want to get the business back up and running as fast as possible.
Yep.
So I guess you're seeing those two quite often conflicting against each other.
Well, some of you, they can, because if people are weighing out where we all have a certain amount of time allotted each day, right? We can spend time on things. And so if it's not your expertise, now you have to do research. You have to trust people maybe that you're not sure because you don't know what to ask the right questions. Well, we come in and are able to do that and see what those goals are. So we have different skill sets of people that go in the field. So we're not a contractor, we're a project and process management firm, but I bring people that have been either in disaster recovery or infection control or construction or a blend of some of those that are going in the field that have hands-on experience. These are people who have actually done these things. So we can give advice and take lead on how to really schedule things and compact things. Like, for example, we had a job recently where both the contractor and the adjuster and the people in the company who'd done this before all anticipated a 3-month time to get this building back up and running. It was fully evacuated. It was a senior living facility. And we said, we can do this much faster. We got it done in 4 weeks, got everybody moved back in. Everybody's happy. Insurance is happy because they saved them business interruption that they would have been paying out. Client's happy, people have moved in. Contractor was surprised. And I got a call from one of the principals of this. It's a large contracting firm, said, yeah, my guys were not really happy with your guy on the field for just driving him so hard. Then after about a week or so, they were like, wait, he really knows a lot more than we do. And we didn't know we could do it this way. We've always done it that way. And our goal really is, if we do our job right, everybody's better off. A contractor should have a more efficient process, which means they get paid faster. Client's building's back up and running sooner. The insurance adjuster gets the paperwork he needs faster so he can close the claim sooner if it's a claim. And if there's in the carrier, that overall, there's been a reduction in cost and exposure. And that's our goal, to try and drive that. If we're doing our job, every stakeholder has a better outcome.
Yeah, brilliant. So if I'm the CFO, Wade, I hope that none of this stuff's going to happen. I'm hoping that I probably never need to buy your services.
Yeah. Right.
Typically, what should the average CFO be thinking about? What sort of things do you commonly see that people don't have in place that they should have in place?
Yeah, and it depends on the type of business. How many buildings you have? Where are you exposed? What are your real exposures? Because sometimes you have more internal versus external. But if you're on the coast in Florida, hurricanes are going to happen at some point, even though you hope they don't. They're going to. It's just part of nature. But it's being better prepared. And so we help also in the preparation. Like, we'll look at, let's look ahead. You're going to need a service. Let's work together to find what contractors really best suit you. Let's also design a standard operating procedure for those contractors that you give to them versus just signing their agreement that they'll come work for you when you have a problem. Is you're directing them ahead of time and putting a plan in place so that when a contractor comes, they know it's your brand X. This is how we work. You may work a little different way for other clients. That's fine. But when you come to us, brand X, we want you to do it this way. You can work with your insurance company to get a dedicated adjuster. Some people do, some don't, but you can get a dedicated adjuster who knows your account, knows your policy already, so that everybody has some familiarity with that, and engage somebody like us to say, like, when this comes in, we know how to direct it how to communicate it. So we've developed a software system to create a communication flow that's secure, but everybody gets access to the same data at the same time. There's now no more worry about who got copied in what email, who got what version when there was an update went out, and maybe somebody had a side conversation. It's like now everything flows through one, we like to call it a single source of truth. It's like all the document that's had, the latest estimate, the latest scope of work, adjuster, client, contractor, they all know the same thing. And so if there's a question, it can be answered also with everybody having full knowledge instead of two parties. One of the slides we show in our presentation will show like all these people have to talk to each other at some point, and they start having conversations and they'll come up with a solution. But a lot of times they forget that you, the client, the building owner, should have been involved in all those discussions. So we try and bring that back to center. And that's what our system does from a data standpoint, just a data flow standpoint. And usually people they're pretty happy to not have to get CC'd. And every time somebody says, well, thank you, like 25 thank yous coming back at you. Like there's a lot of email clutter that can get cleared out as well. That's kind of a soft dollar benefit, I think, in all of this. But from a CFO's perspective, what we're trying to drive is how do we improve cash flow? How do we get better control over retained costs? And how do we protect the bottom line so that while you're paying for things to get repaired, you don't have other money just flowing out the back door because you don't have time to take care of the process. So we try and corral all of those things together and give them a system and a way to make more informed decisions. If they're a publicly traded company, which some of our clients are, they've been really happy that, now I have good data, my quarterly reporting, I have more confidence these numbers are accurate, what my costs are going to be, and when I'm going to get reimbursed. So that's, I think, how we help the CFO side.
That makes a lot of sense. So I guess anybody listening to this and thinking, oh, disaster, where do I start? You're essentially saying, look, really think about what the risks are, what are you exposed to, then start thinking about how am I mitigating against that.
Right.
You're talking then as part of that mitigation, perhaps ahead of anything going wrong, having some operating procedures in place of things that are likely to happen.
Right. And selecting the contractors that really suit you. Some people wait and call up what they think is a big brand name out there. Well, depending on who you are, they're a big brand name. If you're a small one job for them, are they really going to give you their best resources? If they have these much bigger companies than you out there with lots of losses, they're going to probably get the A team and the B team. And in the case of a hurricane, we've got an area-wide natural disaster. You want to get contractors really that align with you. And so we try to help people like, what do you like? And we'll do a lot of ask questions and overlay things. So let's be prepared. So if and when something does happen, you can respond immediately and have people in place that know you. And it makes such a difference where we've had feedback from even the insurance brokers saying underwriters on some of our clients who have used your plan and been doing this for a while have been able to show that they're better than the average risk in the marketplace. And that's also positively impacted their cost of insurance premiums. And so it makes sense. And one of the risk managers that recently we had a meeting with them and just goes, yeah, this stuff is cutting edge. I'm glad we're working with you now because it's going to take a long time for some of our competitors to catch up and figure out that this is actually cost beneficial, not only from a property damage standpoint, but from an insurance outlay standpoint as well.
Yeah. So I guess, though, that this all starts from kind of, I get this. If you're in Florida and you've got a big hurricane risk, of course you're going to do all this and work out what do we do if a hurricane affects us.
Right.
Would you say, though, it's something that nearly every company should be thinking about? Or
I think absolutely.
is the level of risk most of the time too low to be particularly worrying about it?
Well, you still don't know. I mean, we're not in a hurricane or fire or earthquake zone, just in a downtown. The hotel, high-end hotel, something happened and a sprinkler popped an upper floor and flooded down every floor of this hotel. You don't know when that can happen. It turned out it was the fault of one of the guests hanging something on the sprinkler head, like it says not to. Yeah. And it had left for the evening. And I guess the weight over time, just at some point, it popped it and happened in an evening. So you have a shorter staff. It's just like all these things come together and it's bad. We've had other things where a city water pipe broke outside of a large sports venue, flooded out to the tune of millions of gallons of water into this facility. Nothing to do with their building, but they're impacted. And this is now a high 8-figure cost to this place. And we come in and say, how do you handle these things? They hadn't worked with us before. This particular group found out about us after a couple of weeks, but we were able to redirect some things in their case and said, there's different ways to do this. We got them. They agreed with it. They got their insurance company to agree with it. And the adjuster came back and said, yeah, I think you guys saved us just personally. What your efforts did is saved us over $6 million that we were already planning to pay out because of the efficiencies you brought to the table that we just didn't know we could gain. And I think now being better prepared next time would be better, but it's also like have resources. Even if you call on our services after the fact, there's still a lot that can be done because there's a risk in, I think, just giving, like I said, two parties, whether your best interest in mind or not, a contractor and insurance adjuster, they don't run your business. They don't know all the ins and outs. And so we try to say, let's look at it from your perspective. We, OneRallyPoint, want to be an extension of you, client, to represent this when needed. But here's how we prepare. And then here's how we learn. Here's how we learned from those issues. Like if we found that, let's say after a hurricane, we had a client that does, they found they had not done a good job of cleaning their underground drainage system, gutters on certain parts of their building that got clogged up. And so the water stopped up and then went into courtyards and then flooded from the inside as well as from the outside. And these are things where the insurance providers say, this was great. Now we had a plan. We went out and just cleaned all these things out. So a couple of years later, they had a hurricane in the same area, much lower degree of damage in these same buildings because now the drains are flowing properly. Dude, there's things you can do to like, how do I apply this? And that's, I think, why the underwriter said, you're now at better risk. You did this and you learned from your mistake and did what you can. So instead of $1 million loss, you have $100,000 loss, let's say. And these are very key.
So that's something that I'm very familiar with from the IT project world, is having the post-project review. But the post-disaster review, what have we learned? What can we do better? What could we have avoided? Lots and lots of sense coming in there. Are there any particular techniques you'd use to do that sort of review, Wade?
Well, we certainly keep checklists that we're always updating as soon as we learn something is what do we do in pre-disaster checks if we get called in ahead of time. If it's afterwards, we have things to look at and we have different add-ons. So let's say it's an area-wide disaster. Not only have to look at what happened to the building, but we have to look at what's road access like. Are power lines down? Is there power to the city or water disrupted? And so you have to look at different things there. What needs to be secure? I'm in a hospital. I have a few things I have to look at that are different from most other buildings. I have a pharmaceutical section that has to be protected. I have medical gas lines. That's different. I have areas that have radioactivity because of the x-rays and the other scanners that they have in there. So there's a lot to go on. So we have overlays that get a different type of situation. What are we looking for? And who do we ask? So again, let's go back to the hospital example. Let's get the chief engineer involved because airflow in a hospital is not the same. In an office building, hopefully, you're slightly positively pressured, pushing air out. If you're in a hospital, you have parts of your building that are neutral, some parts that are negative, some parts that are positive, depending on what's going on. Quarantine areas, infection control areas, you have different things that you have to think about. So we try and look at all of those items and know the right people in the company to say, you need to help give advice to these people before they start doing work for you. And let's make sure we don't disrupt another part of your building because we put containment up to block what we thought was going to be a contamination from getting over here. But then we inadvertently messed up the airflow. And now the quarantine area, instead of being negatively pressured, is now positively pressured. And you've got to be really careful about those things. So we look at that manufacturing plants too. It's like, what's sensitive? A clean room, like you're talking about from the IT side, a clean room's got to have a different standard of care than just a call center, what's above the platform, let's say. And so we try and take all these into consideration wherever we're going and be attentive to what that client needs on that job.
I can relate to some of this, Wade, from my experience in the chemical industry, where insurance was certainly part of my remit as the finance person in the team. And the company that I work for, we did actually have a very serious fire where we lost an entire warehouse full of polypropylene, caused an absolute inferno.
Sure.
Wide, every fire tender available was called out to try and put the fire out. It burnt for about 4 days and nobody ever thought it would happen. It was an old light fitting. The casing, there's some electrical fault in there. The casing melted. Plastic from the light fitting dripped into the bag of polypropylene that was stored below it. Gradually, the temperature built. Polypropylene that you wouldn't normally expect to burst into flames eventually did. The heat was so intense that afterwards you saw steel girders melted.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen that before.
Melted.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Horrendous.
Well, then you have to think about too, what are the chemical reactions that just took place in what burned? What's in the soot? And where did the soot and smoke go that probably contaminate other parts of a building you wouldn't think about? And so these are key things that we'll try and make sure that, how do you scope these jobs properly? Not all contractors or all adjusters have that understanding. So we try to recruit people with deeper understanding in these areas, but then who else do we ask? Polypropylene, you probably have in that mixture of these plastics, there's probably some degree of HCl somewhere in the soot, which is now
Yeah.
going to react as a very active acid that's going to start corroding things until it's done with its reaction. And so other electronics now become very vulnerable, and you need to be aware of that, and lock mechanisms, all kinds of things. So what do you do? So it's scoping's critical and understanding that. Interesting you have that background. So we've been in some of these fire situations and start asking questions. We're like, why do we have to do that?
Yeah. And this one potentially frightening. I mean, it was one of the largest petrochemical sites in Europe that we were located as part of. So
Wow.
you had very basic raw petrochemicals coming in, plastics, fibers, all sorts going out. And the danger was, how fast is this going to spread? Is it going to take out another plant that might be manufacturing something more dangerous than where it started?
And I don't know where this was, but if you're in the US, you also have EPA regulations that are probably,
Yes.
the water, the sprinklers go off. It grabs the stuff. Now this rushes out. Does it get into the water table and the soil? And how far down does that go? And there's sometimes you have to be cleaning soil and water issues outside of a building. Like I remember one in particular, it was an ink production plant that had a fire, and the inks got just spread out. All kinds of colors of inks are going all over they're on a hill. So it's like going down into places. And you did have to have the EPA come in and say, you got to do this as well as take care of your building.
So we're looking at all of these related risks, looking at a huge situation to manage. I guess one danger, Wade, is you just don't have insurance cover to deal with the scenario you've now got.
Correct. But here's the thing, you still have to deal with it. And we've had some clients say, well, our deductibles, so all the losses below this, we don't need your services. I said, well, I think you actually need us more. So at least in that case, an adjuster, even though he may not be completely qualified technically, is still putting some kind of oversight to what's going on with the contractor's work. If you don't, like, who in your company understands how to manage all of this and how to even review an invoice? There's a lot of sloppiness in invoicing because we checked out on the back end too. There's a lot of people just do a lot of cut and paste just because they're in a time crunch from another job. And you get things sometimes in invoices that have nothing to do with your job. And if someone doesn't know how to read a 300-page invoice, which sometimes they are, you don't know what to look for. You could be paying a lot of money for things that you didn't even receive as a service. A lot of duplications get inadvertently put in. And so we're trying to say, let's get these things cleaned up. Kind of our mantra has been, if you have insurance coverage, it's an easy selection. Our fees have always been covered. The insurance company is always in the end said, your fees are we'll cover your fees. It makes sense. But when it's below deductible or below your SIR, you need us more because you need somebody to watch this out. Like, we do track our value add actually on everything we do, because it's very important to me that we're not just doing a job for money just because it's a job that sounds good. It's like, it's got to have real value, and we try and show the real value back to the client in both property damage savings, schedule savings from affect business interruptions, downstream liability savings, like just having the right documentation. So if someone questions you, let's say this chemical plant, the building next door says, oh, this happened and I got sick. And you say, no, we cleaned it up properly. We got this signed off by the right people. We know we did our job correctly. It protects you from what could be potentially frivolous allegations or lawsuits. And so we try and show all these things and try and quantify what we can. Some things you can't quantify. I can't quantify if I got your building back, let's say go back to that senior living facility 2 months faster. I can't quantify the cost of every meeting that this topic would have been on somebody's agenda and multiple people's agenda and communications. I can't quantify how much other discussion that distracted people from their real work because they're talking about ones that's going to get finished. I don't know how to quantify that, but you, CFO, probably do, a risk manager potentially do. But these are the things we're bringing hard and soft dollar value back, and it's real. I want to, make sure it's important to me. Everybody feels like, we hired you for a reason, and we're glad we did. That's because you're a nice guy. So.
Wade, thank you very much for opening our eyes to disaster recovery, what a disaster might be, all of the knock-on things that take place when something big is going wrong. I think we've talked about some really good examples of all of those knock-on things and some really practical advice of where to start in terms of making sure that you're in a decent place for all of this.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. It's been nice chatting with you.
Thank you for being this week's guest on the CFO Show.